Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, March 20th, 2025, and today we're talking about how to use a backyard garden to prepare for a farm business, Bermudagrass in a hot climate, and testing compost for contamination. So let's do it. All right, well, welcome to Thursday, everyone. I hope everyone is feeling good and doing well. I have had my usual week of soccer coaching and farming with games coming up this weekend. Another round of trees arrived late yesterday afternoon, and although I almost never work past 5 p.m., like that's kind of a rule of mine, I decided to go ahead and get them all planted so I could have that off my brain and not feel guilty when I indulge in some March Madness these next few nights. Never a dull moment at this time of year. All right, so as is our tradition here on Thursdays, we are going to take a few Patreon questions to make sure we stay caught up over there and don't get too far behind where I'm answering what to do with your time over winter kind of questions in June. Seems like a good plan. And Patreon folks, please keep the questions coming because I would also hate to run out of questions. It's a funny balance I have to strike here. Anyway, our first Patreon question of the day comes from Jesse Turrets, who writes, quote, "Hey Farmer Jesse, front yard gardener and hopeful farmer here in LA. I really appreciate the slow down and speed up idea you mentioned recently. I was curious what you think are some things that gardeners like me can practice in their gardens that would apply to a full-scale farm one day. For example, composting is doable, but tractor maintenance not so much. What do you wish you had put into practice on a small scale before applying it to a large scale? And pardon my multiple questions on this February feed. I've got loads of these. Thanks, Jesse." End quote. Okay, so great question, Jesse, and obviously don't worry about multiple questions. I may break them up a little bit, but ask as many questions as you all have. I will eventually get to them. And I love this type of question. What do I wish I had practiced on a small scale that would have better prepared me for a larger scale? Yeah. One thing that comes to mind is that when you're on a small scale, or especially a scale where you don't have to worry about the economic side of things too much, by that I mean making money, spending money you will have to do. That's when you can play and try different things. And honestly, Hannah and I got to do that for a few years in the very beginning of our farming. But play. Grow all the weird things and weird combinations that you can, try different crops, and see what you enjoy growing and what you don't. Maybe not in Los Angeles, but someone in the same situation somewhere else could try some small livestock if you want. You may find that you have a knack or love of growing tomatoes, but a loathe of squash. Or you may love growing mushrooms. You may find that berries are your thing and can put a little bit more focus on that. Of course, also try to get used to some amount of consistent production. Have a couple beds that you start getting a succession down with. In other words, treat at least some of the garden like you would a farm. Even if it's just a few heads of lettuce per week, figure out how to get a consistent succession out of it. Get in the habit of taking good notes. This time could be a really good opportunity to see how long it takes to grow X crop at X time of the year. Then you just have to scale that up, especially if you stay in roughly the same climate. Try a few different bed preparation approaches and see what you like the best or what works the best for you and your climate, what you have access to material-wise, mulches-wise. Because you're in LA, obviously finding a nearby farm for that climate could be tough given the amount of money required to buy land in that area. So some of this assumes you would be scaling to a nearby or similar area. Either way, even in Kentucky, it doesn't hurt to know how to grow in a dry climate because for at least a couple months out of the year, we're pretty dry. So learn irrigation well while you have the time. In fact, if you do know where you're going to end up roughly, do some market research. Try and figure out what there is a lack of at the local farmers markets or the local stores or restaurants. You may be surprised to find that, sure, there's a lot of produce in California, but that doesn't always mean that the market has a local, personable, small-scale vegetable grower. So you may find that there's a gap there that you could fill. Also, it's a great time to start working on a business plan and holistic goals. Watch and or listen to the roundtable we did with Wild East Farm and Cedar Chest Farm about scaling up from homestead to farm business for some good insight on that as well. I'll link it in the show notes as I do all the things. Otherwise, what would you all say to that question? I'd be curious. Let us know. To me, I think you could easily start a little microgreens or mushroom business in a backyard and just slowly scale up from there if you wanted to. Many famous businesses have started in a garage. Why not a backyard this time? Anyway, I hope that is helpful. And up next, dealing with Bermudagrass on 13 acres. Oof, BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by So Right Seeds. So Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to So Right Seeds, that's S-O-W, and use my discount code NOTILL for 15% off your order. That's SoRightSeeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil is a worker-owned co-op making living soils in Cleveland, Ohio using NOP-compliant food scrap compost. They wrote us, quote, "We're stoked to support Growers Daily because healthier, tastier, and generally more decent food systems start with growers like all of you, inquiring minds who care about the land." End quote. Love the folks over there at Tilth. If you're looking for top-notch compost or potting mix, drop an email to the folks at Tilth via info@tilthsoil.com. That's info@tilthsoil.com. All right, enjoy the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's second Patreon question of the day comes from Patreon member DeLorean, D''Lauren, it's a great name, who writes, quote, "Hi from Northwest Arkansas. I would like to add a second Bermudagrass question. The previous owners of our property lovingly hand-plugged 13 acres of Bermudagrass. Mind blown emoji. I planted clover over a bit of it, and it didn't care and came right back. Do you have any experience of removing/growing in tandem with Bermuda? I read that the roots can grow down many feet, searching for its next victim. Eradication seems unlikely," end quote. All right, well, thank you for that question, but also, oof. I wish I had better news for you, but being that you are in the warm southern U.S., this Bermuda grass is going to be a chore to deal with. For those of you who don't know Bermuda grass, you're lucky. It's the worst and also the most genius. Basically, this is a grass that not only spreads by rhizomes under the soil, but stolones above the soil and seed. Humans, in all our biological genius, chose one way to propagate ourselves. Bermuda grass was like, "I'll take 3, thank you." It's incredibly aggressive, resilient, and loves to be mowed and tilled. Many golf courses and soccer fields are made from Bermuda grass for a reason, because you can just mow it and keep it super short, and a ball rolls really nicely over that. Vegetables, not as helpful. So anyway, assuming you are not wanting a 13-acre soccer complex, back to your issue here. I guess my first question back would be, what are you wanting to do with this land in particular? I'm assuming, since you are a Patreon of ours, that the goal is some amount of vegetable production, but how much of this 13 acres do you really want to cultivate? A small amount, and I would say you could do a lot of different stuff. You could till in any amendments you want, build your beds, tarp it for a year, hand pick any additional Bermuda grass that survives and go from there. If the goal is to use too much of that space for tarping to make sense, then, well, your organic options are a bit more complicated. First, the reason I suggested the tilling and then tarping is that you do want to weaken the roots as much as possible. So splitting them up and then eliminating their energy source, the sun, with a tarp is a good start. Like generally, you don't want to till up Bermuda grass roots because that basically just spreads them out. But if you till it up, you break up all that energy source and then you eliminate the light from which it gets energy, and then they're more likely to die back. For a larger scale, though, you may have to think on a larger timeline, or to do it organically at least. For instance, one option could be to till the field, wait a week or so, till it again, and sow some sorghum Sudan grass for the summer, then terminate that in the late summer and replace it with rye for the winter, then terminate that in the late spring, and although your Bermuda grass problem will not be gone, it should be more manageable. Does not like Bermuda grass doesn't, growing in the shade. I will also put a link in the show notes to an excellent trial of Bermuda grass treatments. Quote, 30 treatments were replicated 3 times in 10 by 5 foot plots. Of these 30 treatments, 13 were spray chemical treatments and 15 were mechanical treatments. Additionally, 2 control treatments were included, one in both the chemical side and the mechanical side. This resulted in a total of 90 plots. Treatments included synthetic, natural, mechanical, and organic. Materials Review Institute, OMRI listed, organic options, end quote. Basically, they found that with all those different things they tried, cutting the Bermuda grass off from the light after a tillage had the best results at suppressing it. So cardboard or plastic mulches or whatever makes sense for you, for what you want to grow, is probably going to be your best bet. And not just regular mulches. Those do often have the opposite effect of just like eliminating any competition from the Bermudagrass. And I have heard of people using things like landscape fabric for the first few years, at least to really knock the Bermudagrass back a little bit. But that is a lot of plastic, depending on how many of those 13 acres that you're interested in using. And you will still have to hand pick it around the base of the plants that's coming through the plastics. Someone may say that chemical treatment is the way to go, and maybe there is an herbicide regimen that can work, though according to that study, not necessarily. But that's a bit beyond my knowledge base. Of course, there are things you could do in that field that may not be vegetable production as well, like grazing or an orchard, etc. And you can put a garden almost anywhere in almost any situation, but also not every piece of land wants to be a vegetable farm business. Certain areas of my farm sometimes tell me that directly to my face, but I also don't mean that to be discouraging. You can make it happen, absolutely. It's just going to take some serious work and a solid strategy. Maybe just start small, develop that strategy on a smaller scale that works for you, and slowly work your way out into the rest of that acreage. Anyway, I hope that's at least a little bit helpful. And up next, how to test compost and also soil and water for contamination. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnwah Greenhouses. Harnwah Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnwah Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnwah is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at harnwah.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. All right, so for our last question of this Thursday comes from Patreon member Martin Kumaro, who writes, quote, longtime listener, first-time caller, greetings from Denmark. I decided to become a Patreon member after watching your The 4 Types of Compost and How They're Used video last night. I had never considered the potential contamination from pesticide remnants from contaminated feedstocks potentially rendering a farm/garden completely unusable. Ironically, despite taking my precautions in regards to deworming medication contamination in the horse manure I source for fertilizer potentially wreaking havoc on my earthworm populations, I figured the potential heartache and money you saved me from that video alone was worth the monthly contribution. My actual question is as follows. Could it be a good idea to grow plants that are very sensitive to common pesticides in compost you're unsure the quality of as a way to test it, similarly to what your friend, unwittingly or unwillingly, did in your example in the video, assuming that you either don't have access to or can't afford to test all the compost you have? Are there any plants that would be ideal for this? Keep up the great show, and apologies for any bad English/spelling errors. It's my third language. End quote. All right. Well, thank you for joining the Patreon page and for this awesome question. A nice volley to finally talk about what are called bioassays. Also, I have a lot of affection for the Dutch because all of their contributions to intensive agriculture, for giving us Verbruggen, Veltman, Van Hecke, and as well as the great Johan Cruyff, and the fact that they are one of the few national teams in Europe whose colors are not just blue or red, or blue and red. So despite the U.S. loss to them a few years ago in the World Cup, I still got a lot of love for the orange and would love to come see some of those intensive farms there someday because I'm very fascinated by that. The ag in the Netherlands is wild. The Netherlands is like top 5 in terms of vegetable exporting countries in the world, just under like China, despite being roughly the size of our state of Maryland. You could fit something like 16 Netherlands inside the state of Texas, and it produces an enormous amount of food for the world in that amount of space. Makes you really see how poorly we use our land here in the U.S. Anyway, enough tidbits about a place I've never actually been to. Let's talk about bioassays or testing for contaminated compost. So let's say you get a sample of compost or a load of compost, and before you put it on your soil, you want to know, is this stuff going to ruin my garden? Not the worst question to ask. Or perhaps you're worried about your water being contaminated or existing soil from a previous land use being contaminated. A bioassay is a way you can test any sort of those things at home. First, start with samples. If you are testing compost, get 5 or so different samples, one from each side of the compost pile, plus one from the middle of the pile. You want, because it's going to be spread out, you kind of want a variety of tests from every area of the pile. If it's on the soil already, test from 5 different areas of the soil. If you're testing field soil, just get a few samples from a few different areas and mix them together. You will need a medium you know is not contaminated as well to compare. Like I might recommend some sterile potting mix where contamination is unlikely. If you are testing water, you will want a clean water source that you know is not contaminated, like distilled water perhaps. You will also obviously need a tray or a few trays in which to place the different samples. And these are just grow trays. It doesn't have to be a certain size. I would say probably if you have like a 1 inch or 2 inch by 2 inch sort of block, that would probably be ideal. You will need some susceptible seeds as well. That is to say seeds that show signs of contamination easily. Not all plants show signs of contamination equally or as aggressively or at all. In fact, I'll link a really excellent bioassay table in the show notes from NC State. It kind of gives a whole rundown of how to do this. For compost, the main contaminants to worry about are the persistent herbicides, mostly like the pyralid family in particular, which like beans, cucumbers, and tomatoes are all very susceptible to. So you can use those as your seed if you have some of those extra. Oats and rye are also susceptible to quite a few as well. So anyway, load the trays, whatever grow trays you want to use, with the contaminated and uncontaminated mixes. Seed them with the chosen crop or crops, then germinate them like normal and observe. Contamination can rear its head in many different ways, but often the plants will appear stunted and or spindly. The leaves can be yellow and or malformed. If the young shoots look significantly different than the control, then you may have a contamination issue. Run the test another time, just to be sure. It should not take more than 10 days or so to know something. If it's a contaminated pile, I wouldn't add it to the field until it is more time to sort of break down. Consider turning the pile and adding moisture if needed to encourage the continued breakdown of those chemicals. Microbes will eventually break them down. It may just take a little while. Then test again in a few weeks to a couple months, and that's basically the idea. That's your bioassay. Some of these chemicals are very hard and expensive to test for, so this bioassay is an excellent alternative. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. I think I'm going to wrap it there. Don't forget we are now officially a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. They go into making this content. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and to the team at No Till Growers. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Lou Dempsey. Lou Dempsey is a fun name. This is the story of a farmer in the woods of Virginia and who needs, to come down to town occasionally, get some supplies. So anyway, Lou's in town and Lou notices walking through the streets that it's strangely quiet, but walks up to a storefront and can see the shopkeeper in the storefront, like through the window, sitting next to a glowing plant, looking completely dazed and euphoric, not the plant, the person. And then Lou notices there are kind of these tiny fruits on the plant, and they sort of start to move, almost like like in the wind or something, like going back and forth. And then it cracks and pops open, and a tiny creature sort of falls onto the countertop next to where the person is sitting. And Lou realizes that the plant that everyone has been talking about, that Lou had been hearing about on the radio and stuff, is not just like a new drug. It's a Trojan horse of sorts. So stay tuned tomorrow for the stunning conclusion. Otherwise, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you Friday, tomorrow, for March Madness. Go Cats, and bye.